So, propaganda gets a bad rap, but like most things, it exists on a spectrum. For example, take this video, which is called "This is Canada Nice." It was posted on the official channel of the Canadian Tourism Department a couple of weeks ago, and currently sits at over 4 million views. Suspiciously low engagement, though. I mean, it only has one comment, and it's this trolling thing from my YouTube friend Frank James, but whatever. Anyway, the reason why a lot of people have been sending this particular video to me lately is because it comes off as very propagandistic. Propaganda in the very strict dictionary sense of being
the spreading of ideas, information, or rumor for the purpose of helping or injuring an institution, cause, or person.
And this is very obviously a video that fits that bill, given that when you watch it, it's clear that a lot of what you're being told is, shall we say, massaged to fit a predetermined conclusion. Now, it would be easy for me to just dunk on this video and be like, LOL fake news or whatever, but I want to try to be a little bit more insightful, because when it comes to propaganda, what is most interesting to me is always the motive. And the motive of this video is what I would call pushing Canada's official ideology. If you've watched any of the award-winning videos in my Canadian Theory playlist, you'll know that Canada is a country that has long struggled to come up with a persuasive justification for its own existence. Canada has always been a nation that has defined itself primarily in contrast to the United States, which is hard because Canada has always been a nation largely indistinguishable from the United States. At different periods of Canadian history, different types of differences with the United States are played up, and I would say that the bundle of differences that are being played up at any given time forms the official ideology of Canada. And I say official because I see this as a very top-down sort of phenomenon, promoted by elites in the Canadian government and media and so on. Anyway, the Canada Nice video is a good example of all of this for two reasons. One, it is a video made by the Canadian government, and you can't get much more official than that. And two, it is a video promoting Canadian tourism, and the vast majority of tourists who come to Canada are from the United States. But wait, you say, why would a video targeting Americans be full of Canadian patriotic propaganda? Well, this is the sort of curious side effect of defining your whole national brand in contrast to America. Doing so will also lure in many Americans who are attracted to the idea of Canada as an exotic escape. So, from the perspective of the Canadian tourism industry, promoting Canadian nationalistic tropes can be a good way to rebut American attitudes like this.
Canada? Why should we leave America to visit America Jr.?
Alright, so let's just look at the video already. It is quite short, only a minute and a half, but it is very fast-paced and there is a lot that they've crammed in there. So let's just watch the whole thing together first, and then we can go back and analyze it clip by clip. I'm sure that the Canadian government will not copyright strike me.
Nice is not one place or thing. It's a mosaic, a global village, a pickup game. We pass the puck to be nice.
Nice is for a moment putting down your dystopian novel in a Muskoka chair, opening your eyes knowing this world can be nice.
Nice is celebrating traditions and welcoming newcomers in over 200 languages. I say nice, you say?
Génial, le français de côte à côte, allant du joual jusqu'au chiac. L'hiver est tellement beau, mais attache ta tuque parce qu'il fait frais.
Nice tastes like beaver tails, ketchup, chips, and I'm bars with their local bakery, debating the raisins make butter toss.
Nice is parsing science, the environment, inventions, innovations like insulin, pacemakers, and basketball.
Nice is honoring our elders, educating for the future, acknowledging this land, respecting those who've always been here.
Génial, c'est la fierté de nos défilés, la gaieté dans nos villages, c'est d'enfin toucher à la coupe, puis goûter au sirop d'érable.
Nice is the rock in the Rockies, wide as the prairie sky, as high as Niagara Falls. Hey dude, check out our side.
Nice is celebrating Viola Desmond and Klondike Kate, Emily Stowe, Rita Joe, and all the women who make this great place
Nice is an Alberta steak.
Une bonne poutine après les bars.
Dim sum with family.
Arctic char.
Kissin' Decado Grap. Nice is a secret code. We trained the world to call us, so they visit other places because Canada, nah, it's just nice.
Nice is we the North, we the champs, we the red and the white. We see the rise, not just nice. This is Canada.
Nice. Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Alright, so did you get all that? Now let's do the line-by-line analysis.
Nice is not one place or thing. It's a mosaic, a global village, a pickup game. We pass the puck to be nice.
So right off the bat, they're dropping some very important language that refers to a certain official conception of how Canada is said to be dealing with the diversity of its population. Both Canada and the United States are very culturally and ethnically diverse countries with large immigrant populations. But when you grow up in Canada, one vital difference that's often pushed on you is this idea that Canada is a mosaic or global village, while America is a sinister melting pot. But this is always a bit disingenuous because Canadians are taught to understand the metaphor of the melting pot in a way that's different than how most Americans actually use it. My understanding is that Americans think of the melting pot as meaning all of the different people who come to America kind of swirl around together and improve the country's overall culture by adding their own unique stuff, in the same way that a stew with a lot of ingredients is better than one with just a few. In Canada, however, you are taught to think of a melting pot society as more like a smelter, where all the immigrants are melted down into the same identical gray mush, and the larger culture is never enriched. Whereas a mosaic, or global village society, is one where people retain their uniqueness. Now, I really don't know why so many Canadians buy into this, because anyone who's ever been to America can see that the country obviously has a ton of immigrant communities who have brought a lot of their culture over, and the larger society is fine with that. Even groups that have been in America for centuries, like African Americans or Hispanic Americans or Jewish Americans, retain distinct cultures that have clearly withstood the test of time. But this idea that Canada is a more authentically multicultural society in some way remains a common trope of official Canadian patriotism, as we shall see.
Nice is for a moment putting down your dystopian novel in a Muskoka chair, opening your eyes knowing this world can be nice.
So the dystopian novel that the little beaver is reading here is The Handmaid's Tale, which is of course a very famous book by Margaret Atwood, who was born in Canada. A Muskoka chair, meanwhile, is a type of wooden outdoor lounge chair popular in Ontario's cottage country. In addition to the diversity stuff, another reoccurring motif of this video, and official Canadian patriotism in general, is that the soul of the Canadian identity can be found in isolated objects or artifacts. Usually objects that would either be unfamiliar to Americans, like a Muskoka chair, or familiar to Americans, like The Handmaid's Tale, but with some less well-known Canadian angle. The next segment returns to the theme of diversity, but I think it is really interesting what they do here.
Nice is celebrating traditions and welcoming newcomers in over 200 languages. I say nice, you say?
Génial, le français de côte à côte, allant du joual jusqu'au chiac. L'hiver est tellement beau, mais attache ta tuque parce qu'il fait frais.
So this gets to one of my own personal obsessions, which is the politics of language in this country. So on the one hand, we get an image of Canada as a place that welcomes a huge diversity of newcomers, 200 languages and all that. But then it immediately transitions into a celebration of just one of those languages, the French language, which is the only language other than English that is used in this video. This is one of the big ideological tensions in Canadian officialdom these days. How can you have a mosaic-style country that embraces its diversity, but then also have a legally bilingual society that gives one minority language, the French language, an official status that none of the others have? The implication that this sequence makes is that French deserves to be in a category above the others because it is spoken coast to coast, which isn't even really true. In fact, the line itself kind of exposes that. The woman says, going from joual to chiac, with joual being a type of Quebec French dialect, and chiac being a dialect of French Canadians in next door New Brunswick. A better line would have been to pick some sort of French dialect present here in Vancouver, but of course no such thing exists because there isn't actually a strong French presence in Canada from coast to coast. Just as an aside, I will note that this segment also contains a fun Canadian in-joke. This guy on the log is a character from a 1979 Canadian animated short film called The Log Driver's Waltz. That's very beloved by Gen X Canadians.
That's just like beaver tails, ketchup, chips, and almond balls with every local bakery debating the raisins make butter toss. Nice.
So here we see another celebration of objects Americans don't know, in this case certain snack treats. Beaver tails, ketchup chips, Nanaimo bars, and butter tarts are extremely sentimentalized Canadian foods, not because they're really all that popular or common, but because they are not seen in the US. I quite like beaver tails, but they're extremely hard to find here in Vancouver, for instance. If you're from Vancouver, let me know in the comments where you can buy beaver tails here. And no, that place in the Lonsdale Quay has closed. Anyway, it would have been more accurate for this segment to have a line like, nice tastes like pizza and salt and vinegar chips and brownies and cupcakes, but that wouldn't present an image of Canada as this wonderfully exotic, un-American place, which is of course the whole purpose of this video.
Nice is parsing science, the environment, inventions, innovations like insulin, pacemakers, and basketball.
Similar sequence here. Insulin, pacemakers, and basketball are all very sentimentalized in Canada because the men who invented them were all Canadians. This is an example where Canadian sentimentality might actually be counterproductive to the task at hand, however. I mean, even the newest of these three inventions is still 70 years old, so I'm not really sure if citing them is the best way to promote Canada as a dynamic hub of innovation.
Nice is honoring our elders, educating for the future, acknowledging this land, respecting those who've always been here.
So in this part, we are paying tribute to the Indigenous Canadians, which is a cause that has become much more emphasized in elite circles in Canada in recent decades. Definitely over the last few years in particular, high-ranking people in the Canadian government and academia and art and entertainment have exerted a lot of effort to incorporate Indigenous traditions or understandings into what they do as a way of atoning for the oppression of the past. The big one is land acknowledgements, which this line seems to allude to. This is when some sort of important person at a public event begins their remarks by telling their audience what Aboriginal nations' traditional lands they're standing on, like this.
I want to begin by acknowledging this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River.
We begin by acknowledging the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, upon whose traditional lands we are gathered today.
And it is such an honor to be here with all of you tonight on the traditional territory of Treaty 6, where the Métis people of Alberta share a very deep connection with our land.
There is another cool visual shout out in this sequence when all of this stuff pops out of the woman. It's a reference to the art style of a guy called Norval Morrisseau, who was one of Canada's most famous Aboriginal painters.
C'est la fierté de nos défilés, la gaieté dans nos villages, c'est d'enfin toucher à la coupe, puis goûter au sirop d'érable.
This is a pretty clever sequence because obviously the purpose is to push the idea that Canada is this very tolerant, non-judgmental sort of society, which is what LGBT people are often used to symbolize these days. However, by combining a celebration of pride with a shout out to the Stanley Cup and maple syrup, you get this interesting fusion between a very old-fashioned idea of Canada as a nation of lumberjacks and hockey players with this new, more modern conception of Canada as a place defined by its liberal tolerance. I would say, in implicit contrast to the US.
This is the rock in the Rockies, wide as the prairie sky, as high as Niagara Falls. Hey dude, check out our side!
And here, the subtext becomes text.
Nice is celebrated by Viola Desmond and Klondike Kate, Emily Stowe, Rita Joe, and all the women who make this great place nice.
So this sequence is supposed to celebrate the idea of Canada as a nation of strong feminist heroes. And I get what they're going for, but I feel it comes off as just a wee bit forced because I would question if Canada has ever really had much of a agreed upon canon of well-known feminist trailblazers. The names they cite are Viola Desmond, who was a black woman who protested a segregated movie theater in the 1940s, now best known for appearing on the new $10 bill. Laura Secord, who was a minor, heavily folkloric character from the 1812 war. Klondike Kate, who was a rare female pioneer during the gold rush. Emily Stowe, who was one of Canada's first female doctors, and Rita Joe, who was an Aboriginal poet in the 20th century. Don't get me wrong, I have no problem with shouting out important figures from feminist history. I just find this sequence a bit dishonest because I would honestly question how many ordinary Canadians would even recognize most of these names, let alone say that we celebrate them.
Nice is an Alberta steak.
Une bonne poutine après les bars.
Dim sum with family.
Arctic char. Kissing the cotto grap. Nice is a sea.
Now this bit about the food I find interesting because I think it exposes another sort of tension between old and new conceptions of Canadian culture. So they prattle off more cliched Canadian foods, which I would again argue are notable chiefly because they're not American, but they're also all stereotypically white foods. which sort of undermines the idea of Canada as a welcoming mosaic from earlier. So a guy also mentions dim sum, and they show some shrimp dumplings, which are of course Chinese. So I feel like this part sort of begs some questions. Would the official ideology say that any food in the world could be considered Canadian, so long as it's not American? Are shrimp dumplings more Canadian than burgers? And then finally, the last bit just kind of sums up the whole thesis of the video and explains the title.
Nice is a secret code we trained the world to call us, so they visit other places because Canada, nah, it's just nice.
We the North, we the champs, we the red and the white. We see the rise, not just nice. This is Canada, nice.
Nice.
I actually kind of like the way this is phrased because it's sort of meta and even a bit self-deprecating. Nice is a secret code that we've trained the world to call us, so they visit other places. It's sort of like, hey, maybe we Canadians have overdone it a bit with our bragging about how polite we are because it's made us come off as too boring to visit. Hence why our government had to make this video, reimagining the idea of Canadian niceness as something hip and cool and progressive and modern. All right, so that is my review. I hope I didn't come off as too overly critical because, like I said, I'm very aware of what this is. It is a 1.5-minute video intended to make Americans want to come to Canada by making the country seem unique and interesting, and I think it more or less does a decent job at that. But at the same time, to a Canadian like me, the video also seems very self-indulgent and bound up in a lot of modern nationalistic tropes that seem more geared towards appeasing the ideological hang-ups of elite Canadians than presenting the most accurate picture of the country, which means the video isn't even necessarily great propaganda. In the sense, I would say it is probably less appealing overall to its intended audience than the sort of people who made it. But Americans, let me know what your impressions of Canada Nice were. Do you think it would, in fact, be an appealing video to Americans? Or do you think, like me, that maybe the politics are a little bit too overt? And by the way, if you are interested in learning more about Canada, may I suggest checking out my very cool website, thecanadaguide.com. I made it a few years ago, and it has steadily risen to become one of the internet's most popular resources of Canada-related information. I just did a fairly substantial update, so there's a lot of new information in there that you might not have seen before. Also, for anyone who is curious, progress on my upcoming Canada-related book, Canadamon, is continuing unabated. This is a cartoon book I successfully kickstarted a few months ago, featuring 151 Canada-themed creatures based on tropes from Canadian culture, including several of the things we've talked about today. The scheduled completion remains fall of 2021, so still a fair ways off, but it's going good so far. And to answer a frequently asked question, yes, it will be available for direct order once it is completed, so even if you didn't contribute to the original Kickstarter, you will eventually have a chance to order a copy anyway. All right, that's it. See you next week.